Good day, everybody. Welcome back. You've just seen Remember My Forgotten Man and 6 wonderful short films at Viet Film Fest. I wanted to take the opportunity now to have the filmmakers introduce themselves before we begin this Q&A. May we go from left to right, top to bottom, beginning with Benjamin and Quinn, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Benjamin from North Germany, and I'm one of the directors of From a Distance.
Yeah, I'm Quinn, the other director from a distance.
Hi, I'm James. I'm in Seattle, and I was the writer and director of The Journal.
Left to right.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, hi. My name is Summer. I'm a Vietnamese filmmaker. Now I'm based in London, and I'm a director and co-producer of Land of Opportunity documentary.
Hi, I'm Chi. I'm a Vietnamese filmmaker currently based in New York, and I'm the director and writer of Visa.
Hi, I'm Christopher Radcliffe. I'm based in New York as well, and I'm the director and editor of We Were the Scenery.
And Dang and Chan could not be with us today for Zhan. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start with the first group question. We're going to go in the same order that we just went in. Where did the inspiration to make your films come from?
I think the topic came to us, so we didn't really search for it. There's an organization here in Rostock, North Germany, where both of us come from, and they are dealing with Vietnamese diaspora, especially in Germany, and they wanted to do a documentary about the first generation of Vietnamese contract workers here in East Germany, and also the second generation. And so, they asked me to do this movie, and luckily I met Quinn some month ago, and I know she is doing film too. So I asked her if we want to do it together, because it wouldn't be the right thing if I would have done it alone. And Quinn brought Anna and the story of Anna to us and to our film.
Yeah, the topic was about the pogroms in Rostock that happened in 1992. And we went into research about it, what was there about it. And I saw a documentary where Anna was in, our protagonist, and I recognized her because it was my childhood best friend. And I was very surprised to see her dad in it, actually. Her dad in it. And I wrote her and then asked her if she knew about it, that her dad was in this documentary. And she said she didn't. And it was really emotional for her to see that and to find out that he was part of this pogrom. And we talked a lot about it. And I decided to ask her at some point if she would be ready for us to document the whole journey of her finding it out and the communication with her dad.
Thank you, guys. James.
Yeah. So for the journal, the inspiration for it, growing up, our next door neighbors were a Vietnamese family who came from Vietnam during the war. So my first job was working in their Vietnamese restaurant in our little town in Washington. And so I've had a lot of interest in the Vietnam War from a young age. And the first time I ever left the country, I was 25 years old, and a few friends and I went to Vietnam. And while we were there, we hired these guys. I don't know how familiar everyone is with them. The Easy Riders. They're just motorcycle tour guides in Vietnam. It seems to be a common thing. We ran into them all over the place. But we hired some of these guys. 2 out of the 4 of them were Southern Army veterans during the war. And they just had incredible stories, and spending a few days with them was my favorite part of the trip. And I got this idea for a feature-length screenplay about an American veteran of the war returning to Vietnam decades later to return an item to a family. And I had the thought, what if his Easy and then he hires an Easy Rider tour guide, and what if that guy was a northern Vietnamese veteran? And so I wrote this script, and time passed. I didn't exactly have the resources to make it a feature-length film, so I thought, eventually I've got to make something out of this idea. So I turned it into a short script that I could film in my house, and that's how we got here.
Thank you, James. Summer, what inspired you?
I think, and as like a Vietnamese, and we live in Vietnam, we rarely hear story about diaspora community. And at that time, I think 2-3 years ago, and then when I'm working for my production company called Rise Content and Media, so we want to do like a series about Vietnamese diaspora around the world. So it's called Vietnamese Overseas. So we were doing in UK, in Laos, in Cambodia. And then I met Venice. She's my friend, and also a producer in Hong Kong. And then we just came up with the idea, why don't we do diaspora community in like Vietnamese diaspora in Hong Kong? And then she managed to find, like restaurant owner, the students. And then we found like our character, he's a homeless man who is helped by a social worker that we know.
All right, Chi.
Yeah, I will say right now, my story is much less incredible and dramatic as the three that went before me. This film sort of came from my personal experience. So I am an international student in the US. I recently graduated from NYU, and during my senior year, I really just wanted to make a film that reflected the current state of international students living in the US, working in the US, and sort of going through this invisible abuse where you're hoping for the H-1B visa or sponsorship from your employers, but it never comes because they operate on this thing called hope economy. And my professor told me that I had a great script, and I basically scraped every single dollar that I could to make a wonderful film with my friends.
Thanks, Chi. Chris.
So the inspiration to make We Were the Scenery really came from Kathy. She is a poet. She's the producer of the film. She's a good friend of mine. She's a poet by trade, so she's never made a film before, but she, of course, grew up. It's her parents are the central subjects of her film. And so she was well aware of the lore of them being extras in Apocalypse Now since she was born. Basically, they've been talking to her about it and telling her about it her entire life. And so as a poet, she's done a lot of writing about it. But because it's such a sort of cinema adjacent story, or it's her parents actually, in my estimation, they occupy a really, really special and interesting kind of position in cinema history, just by virtue of being in that film as Vietnamese people. And it's a perspective that has never been explored cinematically before. And so when I met Kathy for the first time, I'm a filmmaker. She asked me oh, what kind of screenwriting software do you use to write screenplays? Because I want to write a poem about my parents being in this movie, but I want to do it in screenplay format. And from there, the whole story of their journey unfolded. She told me, and I was like, you should really make a documentary about this, because it deserves to be, given the cinematic treatment. And she was like, well, I'm not a filmmaker. I don't know how to do that. And I was like, well, I am a filmmaker and I'll help you do it. So that's kind of where the sort of the seed that germinated into the film kind of came from.
Okay, thank you all. I wanted to move on from that, and I wanted to speak on how do you interpret your film in respect to the set's theme, which is on masculinity, or how your characters or your subjects' understanding of masculinity governs how they react to their scenarios. And I understand that there's a tendency to think of masculinity or femininity in regards to relations to folks of another gender. but that may not always be the case here. And sometimes those aspects appear in moments that have nothing to do with gender relations at all. Beginning with Benjamin and Quinn, how do you, again, interpret your film in respect to the theme?
I think we asked the question ourselves when we heard of the topic. But yeah, when I think about it, it's this also the story of Hung, of this man, coming to Germany and build a life, also have his daughter there. And later in our film, there's this discussion. So would he be happier when he maybe would go back to Vietnam? And I think that's a really interesting question. But there is something that held him in Germany. Maybe it's his daughter, and maybe it's his role to being a father. And I think this father-daughter team, it's also, very central to our movie.
Yeah, also in regards of the attacks that happened, we had some other screenings where also the mothers were there and asked us why there wasn't like the female perspective on this. Also because my dad is also in the film. He was the friend of Hung, and I thought a lot about it because the moms in at least the German diaspora are always in the background. And every time I asked my mom or if Anna was there to talk about the topic, they didn't want to answer because we're like, yeah, it's the man's story, and they can tell it better. And they took this role of being present but not talking. So I found very interesting when we showed it to the community that the moms were asking about it, even though when we asked them, they didn't, or they shied away somehow. And I found it very interesting.
Thank you both. Now over to the journal.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I hadn't thought about the film through a lens of masculinity much before this, but I think it is a really interesting question. And I see there being, there are two actors in the film, but I see there being a third character in the film, and Thuy's dad, kind of like his spirit channeled through the journal. And actually, the journal is the only thing in the film that's in every single scene. And so I think in terms of masculinity, the way I often think about masculinity is maybe men behaving in a way that they think men are supposed to behave, as opposed to perhaps in some cases the way you want to really be true to yourself. And so I think the scene where the character Mike describes running into Thuy's dad on a path and shooting first, I think Thuy's dad in that instance is living a little bit truer to himself perhaps than Mike is in the moment. I think Mike's more concerned with being a warrior, being a hero, being the soldier, doing what he's supposed to do, often this place he had never been to before and probably couldn't have pointed to on a map before being sent there. So I think over the decades, Mike is coming more to terms with his true self, as opposed to the masculine man he was supposed to be. He thought he was supposed to be when he was 19 or 20 years old. Just the same way the actor Brian, who's a Vietnam veteran, he went to Vietnam, I think, when he was 19 years old, and he's certainly been through a journey himself in the subsequent decades. So that's about the extent that I've thought about it in those terms, but it is a fun thing to think about.
Thank you, James. And hopefully Summer's cat doesn't get in the way in a moment, but I can't imagine that I can't imagine anything more different than how masculinity is shown through the journal and then Land of Opportunity. Summer, would you like to speak about this?
Yeah, I think for me, masculinity means resilient and courage, because for our character, so he is a homeless man, so he left Vietnam after the Vietnam War, and so lots of people also stay in the refugee camp in Hong Kong, but they end up, you know, in the US or in Canada or in Europe. But for him, so he has to stay in the camp for 17 to 18 years, and then after that, he didn't have any paperwork or didn't have any country to accept him, so he's become, you know, eventually a homeless. So lots of people, you know, after they watch this film, when we screen it, the people will ask, would like concern, and then ask him like, why you not coming back to Vietnam, and then why do you like keep like living like this, like why don't you come back, are you scared of something? But so some people, they would consider him, you know, coward, you know, not to, you know, facing, you know, the result if he come back. But for me, like when I talk to him, he kind of like I think he's really brave. First, like he accepts, you know, to be in this film, you know, talk to the filmmakers and tell his story. And the second, he keep going. He was like keep going. He never really, you know, want to stop, because some people, you know, if they in his situation, they will, you know, give up, or, you know, they become criminal or something. But he still, you know, become like a construction worker. He still live his life. And I did ask him one question, like, why you're not coming back to Vietnam, which I didn't add in the film. Then he told me that he wanted to stay, you know, because there's nothing left for him to, you know, come back. So I feel like there was something, you know, in him that he's still resilient, still trying to this day.
It's a very unique story, and a story that you don't hear about too much often anymore. Thank you, Summer. We go from passive, active, passive, and now back to active for Chi and Visa.
I will say, like, just to start, like, being in this group and hearing about your sharing about masculinity has really, like, sort of like made me review like what masculinity is about in my film. I do think that for the entirety of the film, with a concept like that, the character is always at a weaker spot, even though, you know, like he's tall, handsome, like by all Asian standards, like he's like the perfect husband, like kind of like situation. But the entire film, he's at a weaker spot when compared to, you know, like a bigger boss man who sort of like looks down on him a little bit. And the only time when he gets to be vulnerable, or he gets to be like his actual self, is like during his call with his mother, which is probably like the only like semi-biographical thing in the story, because I cannot remember like how many times, you know, like I go out to the streets of New York, I go to school, I go to work, and I put on like this facade, and then I go home, and when my mother asks me about something, then I give her like kind of like a white lie in order for her to be, you know, be in comfort. Like she doesn't have to think about me all the time, she doesn't have to worry about me all the time. And I wanted that to be reflected in the character, in that in this moment of weakness, like he is still thinking about his mom. And I do think that with masculinity, like it's really hard to like talk about those feelings, at least like in like mainstream media. And like just having like a character like that for other like Asian male characters, I do feel that in this film I tried to achieve that to some extent.
Thank you, Chi. And Chris, I know that the lead subjects are basically co-lead subjects, and only one of them is a man. But would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we do think of them as sort of like a unit, like the husband and wife, Kathy's parents, and her. And it's funny too because like Kathy's mom has kind of always been a little bit for us, kind of the perspective through which we see the film. maybe because, you know, in a sense, like her mom was like a little bit in the production process of making this film, like Kathy's mom was very open and like down to sort of like do the interviews and like really help out, and Kathy's dad took a little bit more convincing, you know. However, once we sat him down in front of the camera and started asking him questions, he was very, very forthcoming, and it just sort of you know, poured out. But I thought the question was really interesting for our film because it's, again, it's not something we necessarily thought about, but like when I sort of started to think about it, it's like there are two masculine presences in the film, which are like Kathy's dad and Coppola, right? You know, and so like they, in a way, we tried to subtly, in some ways, like juxtapose the two of them, you know, both as like kind of like director and subject, but also like kind of elevating Kathy's dad to the realm of the director as well in terms of his home movies and sort of his cinema in a way. Just because, like, I don't know, it was a little bit of our kind of like project with this film to kind of put forward this idea that they found themselves as extras in this like canonical film, this like film, like iconic film that we all sort of regard in a certain way. But in a sense, the film became just another one of their home movies. You know what I mean? And we wanted to sort of like flatten that, like kind of collapse Apocalypse Now with their home movies, you know, to sort of create an equity between the two. And in that regard, create an equity in a way between like Kathy's parents and Coppola in that sense, or you know what I mean? Like, even though in the hierarchy of things, like he was so kind of like above them on set that, you know, they barely ever saw him when he, you know, aside from when he was like eating mangoes and whatnot. Like, I don't know. I kind of like thought about the question in relation to the two of them. And Kathy's dad, I think, exudes a lot of traditionally masculine qualities in the sense that he's like mechanical and like, you know, was a soldier in the war and like suffered a grave injury and all of that. But then also, you know, figured out through his like engineering kind of skill, like how to get them to the Philippines from Vietnam. And I think like, Coppola also like is in this sort of like traditionally masculine role as the film director, you know, like it is unfortunately still a male dominated kind of like field. And so like it's another point of contrast, I think, between the two of them. It's like kind of an interesting prism through which to watch the film.
All right, I wanted to start with some individualized questions now. First individualized question goes to the From a Distance team. Could you tell us viewers, for those unfamiliar, can you please describe how Vietnamese migrant workers came to East Germany and the racial tension that they felt or still feel pre and post unification? Big question, I know.
Yeah, maybe I try to start to give a short summary because it's a very broad topic, but I think it's important to have a bit of historic background to understand the full story. So, like Germany, was separated a long time ago between East and West Germany, and East Germany was the communist part of the country, and so they had a good relationship with especially North Vietnam, and in East Germany there were many jobs, but not so many people for working. So because the industry was growing, and North Vietnam, there were a lot of people who were searching for jobs, for work. And so they made a contract that Vietnamese contract workers can come to East Germany, but only for 5 years, live there, earn some good money, and then, they should go back to Vietnam, and should be a win-win situation for both countries. But what was like really a shame was that these contract workers, they were like held separated in East Germany, because East Germany didn't want them to stay in Germany to like have families there, romantic relationships, because the plan was they have to go back after this 5 years. So they were held like houses separately from the rest of the Germans. But for a long time that was okay. So the Germans saw them as, like in quotations, as the good migrant workers. Yeah, but then, as we know, the wall fell, so Germany became one again, and East Germany was no country anymore. And so the country that made these contracts with the Vietnamese contract workers didn't exist anymore. So the whole country, Germany, they didn't know what to do with them and wanted to send them back much earlier. Yeah, but most of the people were young Vietnamese men. So their life now was in Germany. So they were more home there than in Vietnam. And so many people try to stay, find new work. And yeah, there were this like two societies. Also, East Germany was like the big loser, as you can say, of becoming one again, because like this communist ideas that East Germany had, they were gone. So many East Germans got unemployed, got very frustrated, and yeah, this heated up a lot, and there are a lot of examples what happened in the time after Germany became one again. For example, this happenings that we are telling in our documentary about arson attacks of this home where still all these Vietnamese families and contract worker families live. Which started from this frustration and also from right-wing people who tried to use this frustration to get on with their horrible ideas.
Right. Thank you, Benjamin. And a lot of those politics are still playing out as we speak in modern day Germany too. We go to Chi. I'm going to stay on the topic of current events here, current events sort of. Can you speak more about employer abuse towards international students, whether pre or post graduation in the US?
Yes. So when I started making this film, I really didn't set out to make a political or like an important film because, pardon my French, but I am a 22-year-old. Like, what the hell do I know about hardship or like hard things in life? But after I premiered the film in so many different festivals like throughout the country, and also like in Europe and in Asia, so many people have come up to me and said that like, oh, I see myself in Kevin. Like, that's my boss. Like the abuse, the constant calling on weekends, at nights. And I am in a very privileged position in that I have a job that I love and I don't really have to worry about my status for the next 3 years. But a lot of people that I know, international students from Vietnam, from South Korea, from Japan, from China, they come to US in the hopes that, like something will change in their life, like whether it's monetary or it's because of family. And then they pursue majors and jobs that don't really fit them. And they don't really have a choice, because if you're not like a software engineer or not a finance banker, then your chances of like having a sponsorship is very low. And the things that like even when you're a software engineer and even when you've made it into like these big companies and have like big salaries and a very cushy life, the ghost per se of like sponsorship still hangs over your head, and the chances of like actually getting like a green card is literally 1 out of like 65. So, and you only get 3 chances at it before like you have to apply for your master's or you have to go back to your country. And so it's not abuse in like the traditional sense where it's like violence, but it's like constant like emotional abuse, like from days and weeks and months of like working in the hopes of like getting something that they haven't really promised us, but like America has like sold as an ideal. So yeah, that's my answer to your question.
International students are in a very unique and very vulnerable place, especially with the current presidential administration's policies. Thank you for shining a light on that, Chi, and I hope you continue to shine a light on that as well. We go to Christopher for We Were the Scenery. Christopher, So Kathy Lin Che was, it's her parents who are part of this film. Could you, they talk about their experiences very shortly after the Vietnam War with a curious levity, despite having to reenact horrific moments, fictional moments against Vietnamese people. Where do you think that levity comes from?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I can answer it in two parts, I guess. Like one being that uh, part of what they told us about the experience of being in the refugee camp and kind of like being used in the film, like they say it in the film, they say like, you know, we didn't have a choice, they just told us to get on the bus and go, everybody in the refugee camp had to go, we didn't have a choice. But then also like, but it's not as if like everybody still wanted to go anyway, you know what I mean? Like they thought it was like kind of like an exciting thing to do. They otherwise were just sort of sitting around kind of waiting to have their like, you know, to get processed to like leave the refugee camp or whatnot, you know. And so like on one hand, they just, it's kind of how like any person thinks about like a film production, is that it's like peculiar and strange and out of the ordinary and kind of interesting and a little bit fascinating. And so that was their experience, or that was sort of like part of their experience of being in that film. And they were also very clear with us when we spoke to them that they knew the difference between reality and fiction. Like we asked them these questions about like, well, didn't you find it strange, or like was it hard to reenact, to play Viet Cong, you know what I mean, to like reenact these like things that you just like literally escaped from? And they were like like Kathy's mom was like, no, it was a job, they were paying us, we did what they told us to do, and we know the difference between reality and, you know, fiction. So like that was something that I think like it was really really fascinating, because like from our modern lens, you know what I mean, like we interpret their exploitation in a certain way that is very different from the way they interpret it, having lived through it, and sort of like kind of you know, at the time they were just thinking about like surviving, kind of getting to their next destination, and they weren't so concerned about the ethics of like, you know, filmmaking and representation and exploitation and all those things. Those are kind of like luxurious topics in a way to think about when you're sort of like fleeing for your lives, you know what I mean? Like so that's like the one thing. But also like just very simply, like Kathy's parents are very funny people, and it's something that Kathy you know, in her writing and in the way she wants her parents and their story to kind of be perceived in the world, like from the very beginning of the project, it was very important for her that the film allow her parents to be funny and to be themselves, because she speaks about this sometimes. Like she's like, often when the way sort of Vietnamese people are thought of, like in Apocalypse Now is a big part of like kind of the defining way in which the American cinema going public kind of thinks about the country and the people and everything. Like, is it, it's like laden with trauma, it's like laden with kind of like, you know, traumatic imagery of the war and stuff like that. But like, so for Kathy it was really important to allow like a multi-dimensional portrait of her parents to sort of be put forward, like that includes humor, levity, you know, gossip, you know what I mean? Which like another big part of like the people, the refugee camp were always like, there's all this like gossip about who was sleeping with who, like, you know, what was going on, you know. And so that those are all kind of, but and that was like, you know, very unique for me, like kind of being an outsider to the whole story. Like it was also one of the more fascinating parts of getting a window into their perspectives, you know, because it's something that you know, I wouldn't have necessarily assumed before meeting them. So you know, that's just their natural state of being in a way, and we just wanted to do our best to kind of create a multi-dimensional portrait that sort of let that kind of shine through.
Thank you, Chris. And on the topic of representation, I head over to James for the journal. James, they tell you never to assume people's ethnicities. I'm going to assume that you are not of Vietnamese descent. Is that correct?
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Okay. I was worried there for a second. How did you configure your film to balance both an American and a Vietnamese perspective? For an American director of Vietnamese descent, I find that to be a very unusual development for a film that talks openly about wartime.
Yeah. So I mentioned before I originally conceived of this as a feature-length film set in Vietnam with an American veteran returning to Vietnam. So I actually, when I was working on the screenplay, I took a few trips to Vietnam and I met with American veterans who now live in Vietnam. I met with Northern Army veterans, Vietnamese veterans. I met some more Southern Army veterans. So that those interactions I had all influenced a lot of the story around Mike's character and Twee's dad's character. And then for Twee's character, actually, this was a question basically that Elise Din, the actress who plays Twee, the first time we had a call, she asked me, like, how did you know how to write some of these lines that she says in the script? And I explained, like, well, I read several books by Vietnamese women. One author in particular, Lon Cao. After reading a few of her books, Lon Cao, she wrote a novel called Monkey Bridge that's based on her experience of moving to the U.S. as a young girl. I think she was 12 or 13 when she moved to the U.S. And her novel is all very autobiographical in that way. And she has another just straight autobiographical book called Family in Six Tones. And so Elise was like, how did you come up with certain lines like the 1.5 generation and stuff like that? And I was like, I'm literally just paraphrasing Lon Cao. Like, your character is kind of channeling Lon Cao in a lot of ways. And what I didn't know was that actually Elise narrates Lon Cao's audiobooks. So I had already listened to an entire audiobook that Elise had narrated, not knowing it was her and that I was talking to her. So that was kind of like a fun realization. But yeah, that's it was obviously really important to, speaking of representation, to even in the feature-length version of the film, to not just have an Apocalypse Now situation where Vietnamese people are just kind of the scenery or the background characters. So even in the feature-length version, like, Twee's character is a major role. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think your care and obviously having done your homework shows. I'm very glad to say thank you, James. Summer, what challenges do stateless people in Hong Kong face, in particular stateless Vietnamese? Is there any appetite to address the situation at all?
So we have like contact a lot of organizations, and actually there are like a few people that similar situations to Mr. Thuần that we see in the film. But then unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do. So because after they been released from the refugee camp, and they don't have any like paperwork, and also Hong Kong is returned to China. So it's a bit complicated. So they didn't consider, there's no paperwork or there's no passport for the people, like Mr. Thuần. So that's become, like a gray area. So now they're just, living in Hong Kong without status. They can still work. They can still, rent places, but, not officially, like, through people. And so that's what happened now. And then now Hong Kong is like returned to China. So yeah, there's nothing much like they can do.
Thank you, Summer. It was a very interesting take on a topic that, like many other topics in the short film set, are very undercovered. And I wanted to thank all of you collectively for being daring to take a look at the topics that you do. I'm going to move into our final two group questions. And I want to go back to our original order, so beginning at the top with Benjamin Quinn, then Paul and James. For your respective movies, were there any films or other works in other mediums that influenced your artistry?
Yeah, I think for us it was pretty obvious that our film was based on this documentary that we found. that triggered all the happenings between Anna and his dad, her dad, and and we wanted to also take a different perspective than the documentary we saw before, because it was all from a very outside perspective, not as we saw in the archive film, it was more looking at the Vietnamese people instead of like taking part in their story and what they also are, except from contract workers. And we wanted to make it different and also tell the story of their everyday life. But it was basically based on this documentary.
James?
I work in like video production. I work in like corporate and nonprofit video production as my day job. So I think the main thing I was thinking about making this, apart from being terrified of like directing actors for the first time, especially like professional actors from LA who I flew up from Seattle to film this, I was mostly thinking about it like an interview, like filming it like a really trying to make a really beautiful interview in my house, and specifically having Twee interviewing Mike. So that was kind of my main inspiration, was thinking about the millions of interviews I shoot and trying to just make a really good interview.
Thank you, James. Summer?
I think I got the inspiration a lot from watching New York Op Docs. So it's actually like quite like a good source, of inspiration from different filmmakers. Because I think when we do, this kind of story, I also want, to do a bit like, different, add in a bit of fiction. So that's why in the film, I got some of the slow shutter speed, kind of inspiration from Wong Kar-wai. Yeah, it's a bit, typical, why not we do in Hong Kong, right? Because we're in Hong Kong. But then I want to have, like a combination between fictions and non-fictions, blending together.
Thank you, Summer. Chi?
I really wish before I made this film that someone had told me to watch Fight Club, because like that was like the one film that I feel like was I was completely derivative of that. But thankfully, like it wasn't like a one-to-one recreation. But Fight Club, obviously, like, after I made the film, I watched that and was just in awe of like what David Fincher was able to accomplish with the room and two characters. I was also looking towards just tonally the 2007 film Frost and Nixon. It's basically like just an interview between like two characters who like kind of like know like the opponent's like next move. And I thought that my film, I had always envisioned it as like more of like a double header rather than just like the story about Kevin in and of itself. And another one was very big during my storyboarding process was Sorcerer by William Friedkin. I thought that just the tension in that film, that I wanted the audience also to feel like you're trapped in a room with like all these characters and you feel like physically like uncomfortable, but also like it's like darkly comedic in a sense. So yeah, Sorcerer, Fight Club, and Frost and Nixon.
Well, I didn't have Ron Howard and William. Oh, go ahead. I didn't have Ron Howard and William Friedkin on my bingo card today. Chi, were you done or?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, I think the obvious thing to say here is Apocalypse Now, but that's a given. What inspired you artistically to make We Were the Scenery?
Yeah, I actually tried to watch Apocalypse Now as little as possible before making the film, just because I didn't want to find myself replicating it really in any way, the filmmaking. I was more interested, like we knew from a very early stage that we wanted to interview Kathy's parents, but we didn't necessarily want to show the talking head interviews, which is a little bit odd for a documentary. So like this is my first documentary that I've made. So like I kind of started to explore and look for films that sort of combined voiceover and footage, footage not of the interview subject, to sort of evoke that person's perspective in some kind of interesting poetic way. And I looked at like one of the ones that kind of came up for me a lot was like Chris Marker, like Sans Soleil. That became kind of like a big one for me, just in terms of like how to do that, like how to pair voiceover and visuals, and also like it had a bit of a travelogue kind of component in the same way that our film does. And then there was also this was like a really interesting like intellectual jumping off point for me for the project, but like there's like really hyper obscure like Japanese filmmaker named Masao Adachi who was making films in the 70s under what he would call like the landscape theory, where he would like the idea was that you can sort of trace a character's psychology through imagery of the landscapes that they inhabited in their lives. So you could like kind of show like a location and sort of tell a person's story through the locations that they moved through. And that was a little bit of kind of what we set out to do with this, where we started in Saigon, where Kathy's parents lived, and then sort of traveled their route for to Da Nang and then to the Philippines from there. So it kind of helped inform. I don't think like our film really looks like any of those films, or it doesn't really look like a Chris Marker film, but they kind of gave a little bit of a permission to make a film in this way.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And to lead us out, again, same order. Let's try to be brief about this. May I ask you folks, do you have any future projects you would like the audience at home to know about?
Yeah, we are planning to do a feature-length documentary on the same topic, but now with Quinn's parents and Quinn as the main protagonists.
Oh boy, that sounds interesting, James.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Count me in for watching that. I'd love someday to make the feature length of the journal. Other than that, I'm going back to doing documentary, so I've got a few little short documentaries, irons in the fire, but that's about it.
Feel free to submit to Viet Film Fest if the feature-length journal does come to fruition. Thank you, James. Summer.
So at the moment, I'm in pre-productions for my short documentary shot on Super 8 camera. It's called I Am Everywhere But Nowhere. So it's featuring about diaspora community in Hong Kong and the UK. And also in developed for feature-length documentary about Vietnamese asylum seeker traveling by small people, like a small boat to the UK.
Perhaps we'll see you at future editions of the festival too, Summer. Thank you. Chi.
Next up, I'm filming a horror short film called Inhuma in November, I think. Currently I'm looking for like additional funding, but we're probably at 80% there already. It's about this funeral tradition in Vietnam, actually, that you have to stay up with the dead, with like the dead person's body for a night before the burial. And I've always thought that, like funeral traditions in Vietnam were like so ridiculous, and this concept lends itself to both, like the inanity of it, also the horror of the film.
Right. That sounds like a lot of fun. Looking forward to that one. Chris, last but not least.
Yeah, Kathy and I are starting to develop the feature-length narrative scripted version of her parents' story. So like that is something that we're starting to explore, because there's like a lot of life that they've lived, like both before and after what you see in the film, that didn't make it into the doc short. And it's very, very compelling. And so kind of the larger portrait of their lives, we'd love to kind of like I don't know, fully come full circle with like this idea that they were in a narrative scripted film in the background, and kind of like flip the dynamic and have them in a narrative scripted film, like being played by actors with dialogue and featured in that way, but like being in the foreground, and somewhere in the deep background is like Apocalypse Now and Coppola, and you can't see or hear them in the same way. So that's sort of something that we are just beginning to develop. And aside from that, I have a few other projects, but that's kind of like the main thing.
Well, it sounds like everybody's future project here is eligible for future editions of VIF. And I hope that once the festival is over, you become Viet Film Fest alumni, you become alumni 2 times over sometime in the future for all of you. But for now, that is the end of this virtual edition of the Q&A for Remember My Forgotten Man. I wanted to thank Huang Quinn Nguyen and Benjamin Hujawa, James Andrews, Summer Dewan, Chi Chen, Christopher Ratcliffe, and of course, absent today, but not in our hearts, Dangan Chan, for being part of this set from across the Pacific Coast, the East Coast, and Europe as well. Viet Film Fest at home continues for you, the audience at home, through October the 19th. So please take a look at the remainder of the films we have on the virtual set. On behalf of myself, on behalf of our technical support today, Bruce Lee, and on behalf of Viet Film Fest and the Vietnamese American Arts and Letters Association, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.